Welcome, everybody, to Intentional with Miles Hunter.
What's up?
Today, we have a really fun conversation.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about the multi-ethnic church.
One of my favorite conversations. Seriously.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I'm pumped about it. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm really excited about this topic.
This is something that I think a lot of people are scared to talk about.
Yeah. I don't know why. I think there's a little bit of either I don't know, I'm not as knowledgeable. Is this diversity for diversity's sake because of our culture right now? And so there's a lot of that. The good news is that no, it's not diversity for diversity's sake. It's not, multi-ethnicity for multi-ethnicity's sake. It's gospel. And so we'll dive into that. And that's what makes me so excited about this, because this is gospel centric. You don't have the Bible without ethnicity. And so this is so much fun, and I'm looking forward to the conversation with you.
Thank you guys for tuning in to Intentional, where we're going to have a great conversation today about the multi-ethnic church. I'm excited, a little bit scared, because Miles could take me, if I misstep in this conversation, I feel like I'm not walking out of here.
I hope
I'm
you
not
do.
walking out of here.
Not for any harm to your body. I hope that we misstep together.
Yeah.
And by God's grace, we'll get right back on the railroad tracks.
Join me as I step in it. With Miles Hunter today. We're talking about the multi-ethnic church. This is gonna be a fun conversation, man. Yeah. So let's just kick it off. For so long, churches have been super segregated because as people, it's a pretty natural thing that we segregate to groups of people like us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so we know that the church is for everybody.
Yeah.
We know the gospel says hey, this is go out and spread the gospel out into the whole world. This is no longer just for one people group.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it is so challenging because as people, we still talk the same language, even if it's all English.
Yeah.
We got a lot of different versions of English in America, right?
Yeah.
And so we find ourselves more comfortable with all sorts of different ethnic diversifications of people groups, right? And so what does the multi-ethnic church in one body look like? And, I was thinking, especially inspired by your heart for the Treasure Coast community.
Yeah.
And the idea that you told me, you were like, man, this is traditionally not a diverse community. Yeah. But in the last decade, this community has changed a lot.
Yeah.
And when we look forward at what the next decade looks like, we can project that this will be an incredibly diverse community.
Yeah.
And that there will be a lot of different people from Spanish speaking, there's Haitian people,
right.
Black people, there's white people that have been here, and all different groups that have been here, that are new to here. And as we figure out, how do we do church?
Right.
How do we be good disciples
to
this community? How do we follow Jesus? In the way, what are we called to do? And what are you leading us into here?
Yeah.
That's what I hope we're going to dig into today. And we're going to get some next steps on how we can be more intentional to do better at being a multi-ethnic church.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the what's important, the why is even more important. And we'll dive into all of it. Yeah.
All right. Well, here we go.
Let's go. Let's go.
So what do you think the gospel says about what's our responsibility as Christ followers and as a church to this community?
Yeah, I think if you think about the gospel, right, I just think about John 10, right, as Jesus talks about I am the good shepherd. And so when you look at, man, why is the multi-ethnic church important from a gospel standpoint? You just take Jesus at his word when he says in John 10, he's I have these sheep, but I also have sheep that are not of this flock. And so what Jesus is referring to is in the Bible, there's two ethnic groups, really. You have Jews and you have Gentiles. That's it. And Jesus has come to preach good news to the Jews, but also to the Gentiles, in which the Jews didn't think that they could have salvation. And so he brings these two people groups, these two ethnos together. And he says now you are now one people, as Paul writes to us in Ephesians. And he's hey, God has used Jesus to take two ethnic groups to make them one through the blood of Jesus Christ. And now the mystery of the gospel is that these two people groups that have now become one are living out and looking like Jesus and being my disciples to the ends of the earth. And what I love about that whole thing is he's it's not really for like, yes, the cross is vertical and horizontal, meaning that like we have peace with God and we are reconciled with God through the blood of Jesus, but we're also reconciled with each other. And he's like, the mystery of that isn't necessarily that it's for you. He's like, it's actually to show the powers and authorities in the heavenly realm, like that I am God. And so like the purpose of the multi-ethnic church is not necessarily to heal the racial problem in our country. I don't think that's what it's for at all. I actually think like that God is going to use like the race problem to heal the church. And so like it's a very interesting concept. I forget, Mark DeMoss like writes about it and like, you know, how to lead a healthy multi-ethnic church. And he's like, God is going to use race to heal the church, to show that like, hey, my church was meant to be multi-ethnic. Like you don't hear the Apostle Paul, you don't hear really any of the New Testament writers going to develop or plant homogenous churches. You see them going to develop and plant multi-ethnic churches full of people that genuinely would probably rip each other's throats out if they didn't have the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit of God living inside of them. And it's a healthy thing, but it's a hard thing. And so like what that looks like for us as a church is it looks like us being intentional about pursuing that. Yeah.
I think, you know, I don't think there's many churches who would be like, oh yeah, we want to be exclusive.
Yeah. No.
Right. Like, I don't think if anyone's ever been to church, like they've been like, man, we value exclusivity.
Yeah.
You know, like, I don't think that we're going to have a lot of argument on that topic. But where the challenge comes in, you're a super strategic guy.
Yeah.
So, you know, when we talk about efficiency, you're like, man, I'm all about like intentionality, being efficient.
Yeah.
And when we look at like what it means to bring multiple people together, it's incredibly, it's a big task.
Yeah.
And it's a super big burden for us to take on reaching multiple people because it requires a different flavor sometimes to communicate well. Right. A great example of that is if we wanted to do multiple languages and we wanted to print something and we really want to reach somebody who speaks two different groups of people who speak two different languages, we would print twice as much.
Right.
If we were being intentional.
We still print stuff?
I'm just using an old example.
My wife's from Oregon. You know, they like the trees. Save the paper.
Or if we're going to record this, you know, should we be recording this in two different languages if we're really doing a good job?
Right.
And so it would require twice as much time. You probably have to get a different guy in here because I only speak English well. You don't want any other languages from me.
We can figure that out.
And so like with the thought of that, like I think it's just a natural thing in which we will efficiently maneuver to where there is the most traction.
Yeah.
We will say like, oh man, you know, we speak good English.
Yeah.
Or decent.
We're going to continue to do this in English. Yeah.
So we're going to reach English speaking people really well. And we'll let Spanish speaking people who can do that well, we'll do that. And so if you speak Spanish fluently, like, we've got all that. I think language is probably one of the most like challenging aspects of this diversification and bringing different ethnic groups. Yeah. So how do you see like tackling some of the efficiency problems? And justifying that, you know? Because I mean, if I'm on staff, and you're like, hey, we got to reach 5 different groups of people. Yeah. What does that mean? Do I water everything down? Do I make everything so vanilla that it's like it's okay for everybody? Yeah. Instead of really good for one group of people? Right. Or do I do 5 times as much work? Yeah. How do you justify that? How do you see it playing out?
I think that's a really good question. I'm going to just answer from the top of my head when I think about like, man, how do you combat the efficiency problem of being multi-ethnic and trying to communicate to all of your different people groups and still say, hey, we are an efficient organization, right? Because that's really the question. It's like, how do you stay a consistent, efficient organization? How do you continue to grow? How do you point to your top givers and say like, hey, this is, we're going to put your money, instead of going towards another like mission trip outside of this place, we're going to put your money towards marketing to our Spanish brothers and sisters that we want to reach that live in our neighborhoods. And I think like, I'm going to say, like, I don't know if God really called us to be efficient or if he would define efficiency in the same manner in which we do.
Yeah.
And so when I think about the church, specifically the multi-ethnic church, I think about it in the way of it is healthier and it is of greater benefit to the body and our spiritual formation to have brothers and sisters in the body that do not look like us, maybe even speak like us, vote like us, all of the likes. And so I would say that is at a higher premium to God than efficiency.
Yeah.
Now, the wrestling match and the challenge will be for me and for people that value efficiency as well, is that when you do that, when you place a higher premium on, man, like we want to be intentional about other people groups than just our own. We don't just want to be homogenous, because I think that's easier. The multi-ethnic church isn't the easy route. Hey, we want to figure out how to have our sermon slides in Spanish and in English. Hey, maybe every Sunday we have somebody reading the Bible or the text that we're about to go through in Spanish before we even start. Like those tweaks, I don't see a congregation getting up in arms about. But what I do know is that you're probably going to grow at a slower rate. You're probably not going to grow as fast. Because it's going to be a little harder. And so instead of like homogenous, explosive growth, I think like you're going to grow at a steady pace. And to be honest, like I really think the enemy hates like that the church would become multi-ethnic. I really think the enemy would fight hardly against that, because I think there is great value in it for the people and for their personal spiritual formation. I think the body as a result, the church as a result, is healthier. Now that doesn't mean that they don't suffer, but I think it's healthier.
Yeah. So you're really like challenging what we so often will like lean into those like paths of least resistance, right?
Yeah.
And you're saying, hey, when I'm looking at the gospel, I don't actually read path of least resistance being gospel centric.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And so I think it's a big mindset shift.
Yeah.
I mean, to be intentional about reaching about being a multi-ethnic church.
Yeah.
The idea of that by its very nature is you're saying we're committed to working harder.
Yeah.
You're committed to being less numbers driven maybe.
Yeah.
And more just saying we're going to make choices that are going to follow what I believe the gospel's calling us to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's exactly right. I am saying that, like, yeah, we want to do this in a gospel-centered way. And I'm not saying that homogenous churches aren't gospel-centered. I am saying that, like, I believe God has given me this heart for our church. I also believe that change is coming in our area from an ethnic standpoint. I believe that diversification is happening and will happen. It's happening right now before our very eyes. And I would dare to say, this is very presumptuous of me, I would dare to say that most churches look at the diversification that's coming and think to themselves, man, like, we're going to be multi-ethnic when that happens. And I say, no, I think what's going to happen is there's this statistic that says by 2050, like, Caucasians will no longer be the preeminent race, like, in our country.
Right.
And so when I think about that, I think many churches look at that and are like, well, we'll be multi-ethnic when that happens. We're going to naturally change. I think there'll be more homogenous churches than ever before when that happens, if people aren't intentional about being multi-ethnic now.
Right.
And so, like, I believe that it's like, hey, we are preparing for what's coming, but that's not what we're doing it for.
Right.
We're doing it because, like, we believe, like, this is what God has called us to do in his word. And as a result, like, we're just going to be intentional about it up front now. And yeah, it's going to be a challenge. Efficiency may not be the word that rings true for this place, but intentionality will.
I imagine that you understand some of the pain points of bringing multiple groups of people together.
Yeah.
Right. So has there been like something that God has put you through, that you've really like grown through, that makes you feel confident enough to like tackle this? Because I'm not.
Yeah.
You know, I can just say like I don't feel equipped to lead the church.
Yeah.
If I wasn't in charge.
And to be honest, I don't either.
Okay.
Let's just throw that out there.
Yeah.
I don't either. I think God gave me a heart for the multi-ethnic church when I was at Liberty.
Okay.
And so when I was there as a student athlete, I was there for, 3.5, 4 years, graduated, got to grad school, finally met Jesus about 3 years in there. And then when I finished grad school, I started working in the graduate school office as my wife and I were engaged, getting ready to get married. I'm just working odd end jobs, broadcasting in the grad school office and, as a part-time youth pastor. And I had really was just starting to deepen my relationship with the Lord. There was a guy that was in my grad school office with me, working alongside of me, James Hobson. He's now a pastor in Lynchburg, Virginia. And he started taking me during our lunch breaks, and we would go into the conference room and he would just open up the text with me and he would show me how to read God's word. And so I started falling in love with the word of God. And as I did that, a few months went by. Janae and I are thinking about moving to Oregon after she's finished graduating in May. And there was a guy that took a liking to me that was a really good friend of mine. He had been at Liberty forever. Dell was his name, and he had a close relationship with the vice president of all residential at Liberty.
Okay.
And Dell had been trying to push this multi-ethnic kind of vision for Liberty. DEI offices, diversity, equity, and inclusion offices were opening all around the country. It was just getting started. And Dell set up a meeting for me with the vice president of Liberty. And I had no idea what it was for. And the day before, he just said, "Hey, I need you to meet me tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. We're going to talk about the diversification of the school." And I was like, I don't know what the crap you're talking about, but sure, I'll be there.
Can I just
interject?
Is this a bunch of white guys telling you that you're going to...
Dell was black.
Okay.
The vice president was definitely white.
I'm just trying to get a picture.
Yeah, Dell was black.
You got a bunch of white leaders.
Yeah, all
hey,
the
man,
VPs were white. Yeah.
We're going to be diversified.
Yeah, but they knew it was a problem.
So we got to hire this black guy.
Yeah. Well, I was black working in grad school office, and I didn't see race at Liberty as a problem. Okay. I grew up in the student athlete realm.
Yeah.
And so you only hang out really with the other 600 some odd student athletes. We're the most diversified group on Liberty's campus.
Okay.
So everybody that I knew, that I hung out with, I'm like, oh, we're fine. The campus is not a problem.
Yeah.
And so I had a buddy of mine that I knew worked in a different department that could pull some numbers for me, and he pulled the numbers for me. With Liberty's diversification statistics.
Yeah.
And what I realized is that black people at Liberty were only 3%.
Ooh. Okay.
And I was like, oh, I guess this is an issue. 1.5% of that 3% were student athletes.
Okay.
So I was around most of them,
Yeah.
And so I went into the office the next morning with kind of that thought in mind. And then I got hired that day as Liberty's first kind of DEI officer, as Liberty's diversity coordinator. And so basically I was just commissioned with recruiting diversified students, helping them matriculate, making sure that they graduated, and then they ended up hiring a vice president for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I developed in that season of life a heart for the multi-ethnic church, because as I started to do that, I needed to develop a why. I was like, why is this important? Mainly, why is this important to God?
Is this like a checkbox that all corporate organizations just have to check, and I'm just a cog in that wheel?
Yeah,
or
pretty
is there
much.
Something more?
I loved being at Liberty. I loved my job. I had more freedom as a 24-year-old flying around the country and trying to figure out DEI than probably a 24-year-old should have had.
Okay.
I just didn't like the corporate structure and ladder at Liberty. And I had a great experience. There's all kinds of things that have come out about Liberty since, we've been gone. Literally, I think the year after we gone, the bomb went off there.
Okay.
And all types of leadership structures have shifted, but I didn't experience any of that myself.
Yeah.
I worked closely with the vice president that was awesome and was all for it. And so I was just God was using that experience to develop a heart within me for, hey, like my church, and I want my church, and I want your heart for my church to be multi-ethnic.
Yeah.
And so like, I know that if I can weather the storm at a Liberty University, and deal with all of, the uphill climb there, I can do that anywhere.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of why I'm like, I don't feel equipped. I'm learning more each day. I'm learning God's heart for the multi-ethnic church every day. But what I would tell people is like, Mike Lienzo, he explains it. He's like, there's not a strategy. There is no like magical strategy for the multi-ethnic church. There's a heart posture. And the heart posture is one of humility. The heart posture is one of intentionality. The heart posture is saying like, God, I want to be as close to your word and as gospel-centric as possible so that our church can look like the kingdom of heaven. Like that is our goal in church as it is in heaven. Like that is the goal. I want Revelation 4 to be a real possibility at TC3 on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And if that happens, it's like, okay, like we can continue to push forward. I think the world craves that. I think the diversity, equity, and inclusion thing, like the world somehow, Disney somehow has figured out, they miss a key component. They miss the gospel, and so like I don't think it's in its fullness and its richness and its glorified state until the gospel and the person that is Jesus Christ enters in, and he begins to change it for his purpose and his glory.
What I hear you saying is that, like, for you, the idea of a multi-ethnic church is not just a DEI checkbox for TC3.
Right.
And it's not just you being like, I'm a black preacher.
Yeah.
I'm going to be more diversified here. It is you saying like, I think that I feel convicted that God has brought me here to this community because it will help people better experience who God is.
Yeah.
If they can better love God, serve God in a diversified congregation.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is that, like, yes, I think they'll love the Lord more. I think it'll be more God honoring.
Okay.
I think like a multi-ethnic church, I think a diversified church is honoring to the Lord. Like he literally says, like, he's like in Ephesians 3, he's like, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known. Why? To the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms, aka like it's bigger than us. Like what God is saying is like he's showing us off to say, like, look at my masterpiece.
Yeah.
Like, look at the Jews, look at the Gentiles. They are together. Like all nations are one, the church, one body, one new nation, one new ethnos is literally what he's saying. I have built a new ethnicity and they are the church.
So this isn't a marketing strategy.
No, this would suck as a marketing strategy. This would be terrible.
I mean, I don't know. A lot of people are doing it. A lot of people are trying it.
Yeah,
right?
A lot of people are like, let's build a multi-ethnic church.
The DEI thing. I mean, look at every marketing piece of collateral, like for the last 20 years.
Yeah.
There's like an Asian person, black person, one or two white people,
and I think,
girl, always like.
I think the difference for the body is that, like, you can't force this.
Yeah.
You can't I mean, like, we could hire, and we can pray to hire, but like, I'm not gonna, controversial statement, I'm not gonna hire a black guy because he's black that's not as good as the white guy.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah,
you should hire the best person.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, like, that's a dangerous game to play. Like, I refuse to do that part. Like, we're going to hire people that are going to advance the kingdom of heaven forward in a very mighty way. They're going to work their butt off that I have to tell to go home and be with their family and be with their wife.
Yeah.
And so, like, I'm going to pray though. I'm praying for a Hispanic guy. I'm praying for an Asian guy, but really you can only, in your community, you can only reflect your community.
Sure.
And so, like, my goal and my heart is not that, hey, like, I want our church to be 35, I'm terrible with numbers, but 35% black and 25% Hispanic and, 65% white. I know that doesn't equal 100. Just go with me.
But we're you
more
get
than
what 100%.
You get what I'm saying. Like, that's not it. I want our church to reflect our community. And so like when it comes to diversity, like that's how I want our church to look. And I think that's God's heart, you know, is that this place would look like the community that it's in. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm excited when I hear like the purpose behind this is to honor God.
Yeah.
Because I don't think that what follows honoring God better is ever like a bad thing.
Yeah.
Right. For any organization.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if this is not like a corporate, you know, checkbox kind of a thing, which I think, you know, for me, and I mean, I get the fact that like I'm the least qualified person to have this conversation as far as like,
I think you're pretty qualified.
how to do it. I mean, I think as a white male, you know, who had like, I don't feel like I'm the right guy to like lead the church into understanding and how to best handle it.
Yeah.
I'm happy to definitely screw up the conversation, though.
Yeah.
definitely happy to.
You're not doing that at all.
But when I think about like, man, there's like an eye roll that I want to have about the idea of hiring somebody to just to like check that box, you know, or to say like, well, we have Spanish people here. We're gonna like have a little like one scripture verse is gonna be read in Spanish, so that way we feel like we can say, oh man, now we're more, you know,
diverse,
inclusive to a different ethnic group.
Right. Yeah.
So to do it for the sake of doing it is wrong, but to do it for the sake of honoring God is exciting.
Yeah.
And I think anytime that we are willing to take on a challenge under the purpose of honoring God and saying, I believe this is what God is calling us to do in this community. Not saying that every other church is called to do that, but that's what God is putting. He's put you as the leader of this community at TC3. And this is what he's put on your heart. And he's prepared your heart for this. This isn't just like, oh man, senior pastor, and now all of a sudden, but he's been preparing your heart for a decade to do this. You know, like, and he's planted those seeds through your experiences. Which is super cool to me. I mean, to me, that's really exciting. But what do you think is like the wrong way to handle this? Like the wrong way to go about this? And what kind of like things have you seen in the past where you're like, I just want to talk about like my thoughts on, I know it's not this, because I think you kind of said like, I don't feel qualified like to say it's exactly this. And I've done it so many times and I've accomplished all of this with bringing a multi-ethnic church, you know, to grow a really successful multi-ethnic church. But have you seen any ways like that, you know, hey, I'm not, this is not the way. And I think saying, I'm not just going to go hire people that are not qualified or not the best people for the job.
Yeah. I think the wrong way to do this is to ask your church to implement something like this and to be sensitive to this without discipling them first. And so before this is an ask, this is a like, how does the scripture and why does the scripture tell us to do this? Like, give me your textual backing for this. And so like, if you're not discipling your people, when it comes to this, if I'm not preaching about the ethnicity in the text and how God has called us to this, how God has used Jesus to, you know, tear down the dividing wall of hostility. Like if I haven't taught these things correctly first, I can't ask our people to do this. It's like asking your church to tithe before you've taught them to budget. Like it's a bad decision. And so
that's a great example.
Yeah, and so it's just like, hey, can we be disciples of Jesus first?
Yeah.
If we are, like this will be a natural flow into our spiritual formation and spiritual rhythms. But if you go about it any other way, it may work, but sooner or later the wheels are going to fall off because your foundation is not big enough. You don't have a big enough why. You don't have a big enough foundation, and that's a mistake. And so like if the why is the text and we have the people of God that are anchoring themselves in the text, that are growing in their knowledge of the Lord, and I'm doing a good job of equipping the saints to do the work of the ministry like the text tells us to, then this will happen. Not that it'll be easy, but like when it gets hard, we'll have enough strong enough anchor to be like, all right, let's keep pushing. We have to do this because the text calls us to, even though it's hard.
I love that you mentioned the discipleship conversation.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this conversation and you have not listened to the first episode, which was the discipleship conversation,
Yeah, go back.
the core principle is we're going to follow Jesus. And as followers of Christ, it oftentimes requires sacrifice to stop doing and to spend time chasing, following Jesus is sacrificial.
Yeah.
And it requires to do less so that we can do more.
Yeah.
And so the idea here of like getting intentional about multi-ethnic church requires us to be in that zone of being intentional with our discipleship, of following Jesus. And when we follow him, when we look like him, our heart will be for his church. Right. Our heart will be there. And so I love what you're saying, that it's not efficient, because being a disciple isn't about efficiency. It's not about doing as much as you possibly can.
Yeah.
And it's not about the biggest numbers. It's not about throwing the biggest parties or doing the biggest events or having the most numbers, or you being able to say, oh man, as the leader of this church, we've done X, Y, or Z. But to say, hey, we have followed Jesus more intentionally.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we reach this community in a very different way.
Right.
And so the Treasure Coast community, the change we believe we're called to make here is going to start first with loving, following Jesus and being more obedient and spending more time with him, knowing him more. And the next action step you're saying is we've got to take that and start to translate it into how we can better love and reflect the community that God's put us in.
Yeah. 110%. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. And so at the end of the day, I think it's hard to love people outside of this place that don't look like you, think like you. I always go back to vote like you. I'll find a different one because I know that's contradictory, but whatever, but that's the deal. It's hard even now, especially now in our country, like this, they call it like the homogenous unit principle, right? Mm-hmm. And so like right now, everybody that lives around you in your region, in your area, in your city, most of the time usually thinks like you. There's not much diversity of thought. And so I think that's unhealthy as a people group. I think that's unhealthy because it doesn't give us, one of the things that I loved being at school at Liberty was because it was a Christian school, they didn't just teach us Christian principles. They taught us also the secular principles of science, of math, of psychology, things of that sort, so that we knew how to step into the world and also still be a follower of Jesus. And I feel like right now, many people won't be able to step into the other side and be like, man, how can I be a light right where I am and understand, like, man, I can seek to understand them before I need them to understand me. Like, seek to understand before being understood. And so I think that's something that the multi-ethnic church will offer the people of God. I think we will be better citizens in society as a result, obviously better followers of Jesus, which is first and foremost. But it's really hard. It's really hard to have compassion for, let's use a hot topic. Let's say the abortion issue, right? It's really hard to have compassion when you talk about the abortion issue and just say like, man, we support, babies, and when you haven't engaged with somebody that has had an abortion and they've explained to you why, but they're also brother or sister in Jesus. Yeah. And so like you have a different lens at that point.
Sure.
It's really hard to see things through a follower of Jesus Christ who's a black person, to see it through their lens when they're screaming out Black Lives Matter, but they're not in your church and you just see what you see on the news. And so it's really hard to have compassion.
Yeah.
And so like at the end of the day, like to have a multi-ethnic church is to be like, man, and when you see people that are Hispanic getting deported and you're like, man, we need Hispanics out of this country. It's really hard to have that heart when you got Hispanics in your church and you saw ICE come take one of them the other day and you know that they've been trying to get on track and do things the right way. Yeah. Your heart begins to shift. And so like right now it's, hey, let's God, give us more ethnicity and give us a diversified congregation so that you can begin to mold and break our hearts for the things that break yours. Yeah. And the only way that can truly happen is if we have people in this place that don't look like us, that are experiencing the things that we see on the news that we say, of course.
Sure.
Too. Like what a gift,
yeah.
And again, it's hard. Some of it's suffering, but at the end of the day, like, it begins to mold our hearts to be more like our Father's.
Well, I think that Paul said, hey, man, the suffering is 100% a part of doing this following Jesus thing.
Right.
Being a disciple does not come without the suffering.
Yeah.
And Jesus even says, like, you will be blessed in your persecution. But we don't think that way.
Right.
I think about you just hit like pretty much every hot topic right there. Great job. Making, anybody squirm. It's like, the pastor talking about abortion, Black Lives Matter, deportation. You might have thrown the voting word in there. I don't know. Right? Like, I mean, these are like such hot buttons. Right. And again, you're not saying them to try to just stir up controversy. You're just saying, hey, if we want to pursue Christ, it will be hard.
Yeah.
And we will have to not bury these things in our bubbles.
Right.
And say, I just want to stay in my bubble.
Yeah.
And instead you're saying, I think as a church, there is a challenging road ahead of us.
Yeah.
Being the church, like the big church that God's called us to be, not just talking about TC3, but like the gospel is saying that we are called to love these people and to consider these not just as a political position,
right,
but to consider the people his children, and to love and to treat them in a way that he treats them, and to allow your heart to break the way that his heart breaks.
Yeah.
And if we did that, we would probably start to act differently.
Yeah.
Right? If we really stopped to consider others outside of our bubble.
Yeah.
We would probably act differently.
Yeah. Yeah. And not just act differently. Like, it's a heart posture that says, like, man, this isn't about politics. This is about, like, what if we stop seeing it that way? What if our whole perspective were to change? Like, this isn't about politics. Let's take the politics out of it. Let's think about it as like the people of God, like made in the image of God, that are experiencing hardship. Like, I when those people are sitting next to you on Sunday morning, the politics goes away.
Yeah.
Because they're people that you're doing life with. They're people that you're in relationship with. And so if your Spanish brother or sister is all of a sudden not there, but you see his kids and his wife there, it's like, what happened? And so it's all of a sudden not a political issue. It's like, we got to take them dinner.
Yeah. I think that the challenge still is, like, we have been conditioned ourselves to be so comfortable as Americans.
Yeah.
Like, we have so many comforts.
Right.
And so when you think about, like, what does it even mean? How can I even be bold in my faith? And how, I'm afraid to even to post something that is anti-abortion on social media because of the backlash, the persecution that would come from that.
Yeah.
Right. And so often, I know people who are on boards, like for pro-life groups, and they are afraid to even talk about this thing that they support financially, that they serve with their time and everything, because of the persecution that would come with it. And it's under this guise of, like, well, I don't want to offend people. Yeah, I don't want to, in any of these topics, we can say, like, we're afraid to take a stand because we're not allowed to, because for being, like, loving, inside of our own church community, oftentimes there's people who are, like, persecuting us for actually being loving and looking beyond just the topic, and actually trying to consider the people behind the politics.
No, that's 100% right.
This is like a big mess.
Yeah,
it's like just
a
super
hodgepodge of stuff, and so
super complicated. This is not simple stuff for anybody who's listening to this conversation.
I think it is simple, though. Like, it's simple, but it's hard. But that's what following Jesus is. Right? It's the gospel is so simple. It's not a complex thing that you have to wrap your mind around. Like, the one complex thing about the gospel is that there is a God that is so loving that came to earth to rescue a people that he created in his image that sinned against him. Yeah. It's like, well, I don't get that type of love. That's not transactional type of love.
Yeah.
So yeah, you could consider the gospel to be complex in that way, but it's not complex. It's just that like we don't get it.
Well, we make it complex.
Right, yeah. But the gospel is
these
simple.
things, yeah.
It's the after I accept the Jesus that the gospel has presented to me, I now have to surrender and throw away all of my preferences and follow him.
Yeah.
And so like that's what's hard about it. And so like all of these issues, like politics tries to make them complex, but like let's go back to just the original church's design, and Jesus is just simply saying, I need you guys to love each other so that you can put on display my love for you to the world and then to the heavenly realm. Mm-hmm. He's like, I need you guys to love that well, which means that humility has to be at a premium here for you. Nothing in us naturally goes to serve and be with people that don't look like us or don't think like us. Like nothing. I do this terribly. To go, like I got Hispanic neighbors that actually love Jesus that like haven't sat at my table yet. And I would say like, man, I'm too busy. I mean, yeah, right now in my season of life, I might be. I got a newborn at home. So like I'll give myself some grace. But what about the 3 years prior to that I've lived there?
Right.
And so like I'm saying this because like this whole part of following Jesus and being an apprentice of Jesus and acting and looking like Jesus is something that I have to grow in as well. But if the multi-ethnic church is going to be a reality, if the kingdom of heaven in church as it is in heaven is going to be a reality here at Treasure Coast Community Church, like one, it needs to start with me. It needs to start with who's around my table. It needs to start with my intentionality. But then like once I start accomplishing that, and I will start accomplishing that, like the expectation is like, church, let's ride. And so it is not a complex thing. It is just being intentional right where you are. I got, baseball moms and baseball dads that have, their kids playing baseball all around the country with people and kids that don't look like them. It's like, have you invited them to be around your table yet? They don't know Jesus. You talk to them at every game you go to, And so like this isn't hard. No, let me rephrase. This is hard.
It is hard.
It's not
complicated.
Yeah,
we make it complicated, though.
Yeah, we try.
It's a good excuse for us to feel better about not trying.
What if they don't like my food? Well, order out, bro. Like who's cooking nowadays, bro?
Yeah.
You got DoorDash. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
And so, and let yourself make mistakes. Let yourself fall on your face. Let yourself, and maybe they'll give you grace, and maybe they don't, but you tried.
Yeah.
And so, and keep trying. And so that's the commission. I feel like the multi-ethnic church is a part of the Great Commission. Go therefore, make disciples of all nations. Like, come on.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good summary. Would you give us a takeaway?
Yeah.
How can we start to be more intentional besides inviting? We can start reaching out to people who don't look like us.
Yeah.
Be open. Are there any other steps that we can take away from today?
Yeah, I would say, who do you work with? Who are you around? Who do you see at the dog park? Everywhere you are, and the people that you engage with organically are the people that don't know Jesus. And if you don't know whether or not they don't know Jesus, then why? Like, it's hard for me to have a conversation with somebody that's trying to get to know me as I'm sitting at the dog park or as I'm at the park with my daughter. It's hard. Like I have to be intentional about leaving God out. And if I'm speaking about Jesus and my story, if they're trying to find out about me and how I got here, because usually the first question I ask is like, where you're from. You're from here. How long you been here?
Yeah.
And then the question gets thrown back at me, and then they ask, how'd you get here? And I have to say, like, only Jesus. Like it doesn't really make sense without Jesus. And I'm not trying to throw the Bible at you. Like it just only makes sense with Jesus.
Yeah.
to be where I am right now. And as I begin to have that organic conversation, within 2 minutes, I know whether or not they know God. And within that time frame, it's like, if you find out they don't know Jesus, and and you're sitting around with them and you're with them often, it's like, hey, like, my husband and I are like having dinner tonight. You want to come over? You want to come over next week? We'd love to have you and your family over.
Yeah.
And so
you don't have a husband, just to be clear.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't have a husband.
Right.
I have a beautiful wife.
Yeah.
And she's awesome. We have 2 amazing kids.
I didn't want that.
One's
that
amazing. One's a baby.
Confusing.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah.
for the clarity's helpful here. To know what, we can go far with that. No, nope. I have a wife.
It's not that kind of.
Not that kind of
yeah.
deal. But no, I think that would be. That's the simplest way.
Yeah.
Like, you're already having those conversations. This isn't go out of your way. This isn't like that. God will ask you to do that sometimes, but I don't think this starts that way.
That's great. Miles, thanks so much for taking time. Thank you guys for joining us today to be intentional and to take a step to be more intentional, better disciples, to be the church that God's called us to be.
Yeah.
And we'll see the whole community change if we can all take little steps. We can all start. I love how you said it, it's going to start with my intentionality.
Yeah.
And when it starts at my table,
Yeah.
it can grow from there.
Yeah.
I love that you've taken on that responsibility. Thank you for leading us and challenging us to be better and be willing to have this conversation, you know, and have these uncomfortable conversations that not everybody wants to have.
Sorry. Thanks, buddy. Thanks for having me.